moved over to a company called Bradford and got some Medicaid experience, which is interesting now given the healthcare debate. And then a personal situation came up, which I felt that it was better to go get away from in 1978. It was actually a very interesting year personally, but I decided to move, and I wound up taking a job in Dallas for a consortium of Blue Cross plans that was going to develop a new Medicare care system. That didn't work out because of the politics of the place, and so I wanted going to work in 1981 for Chilton, which was a credit bureau. Now it's part of Experian, but at the time it was separate. And that worked out very well. I was there for 6.5 years, and I lived in Dallas, lived in 4 different places. I lived 2 of them. It was a very interesting time in my life, and that was when the AIDS epidemic happened. I did not get infected, but I was very active in going to the information forums about the virus and there was a nasty political climate in Texas. In 1983, there was a proposal to enhance the Texas sodomy law and to ban gays from all occupations, not just the military, but from practically all occupations. The theory was that gay men were amplifying the virus, which, if it mutated, could then change and then threaten the entire rest of the population. That was sort of a science fiction theory that nobody likes to talk about today, and it really wouldn't happen, but that was the theory the right wing was trying to influence them. This almost happened, but fortunately it died in committee, and then that law kind of got forgotten about. I got involved in volunteering with the Oak Lawn Counseling Center and being a buddy to some AIDS patients, or people with AIDS, and befriended 2 of them. One of them made an almost miraculous recovery, and then eventually died anyway after making a huge comeback. You know, I was lucky that I didn't get infected, but because I certainly could have. So I'll say that. One of the other things that happened is that when I was living in New York City in the mid-70s, I became involved with a place called the 9th Street Center, which had been organized by Paul Rosenfels and his lover Dean Hannett. Dean later on went straight, but that's another matter, but just for the record I'll say that. But Paul wrote a book called Homosexuality, the Psychology of the Creative Process, and in it he advanced the theory of polarity, that everybody was psychologically masculine or psychologically feminine, and that people could be balanced or unbalanced or objective or subjective. Everything was binary to him, but it was combinations of binary traits. So the fluidity in his mind wasn't gender fluidity the way we talk about it today. It was combining all kinds of other traits in binary pairs, and that gave you a lot of combinations. It was almost like a mathematical theory. In his books, the way they were written, they were almost like mathematics texts. They were like proving theorems. It was an incredible thing to read. After living in Texas, I came back to Virginia in 1988, and I had one of the most interesting jobs in my career was to work for Lewin ICF, which has since then become very involved in the healthcare debate again. But I wanted a more stable company, so I went to work for Uslico, which turned out to be a very critical move. I'm still in Arlington. They were a company that specialized in selling life insurance to military officers. I went to work there in 1990. In 1993, as we know, Bill Clinton was inaugurated, and Bill Clinton proposed eliminating the ban on gays in the military. And also by that time, I had started getting interested in the problem because I was really quite impressed with the records of some of the people that had opposed the ban. Keith Meinhold and Joe Steffen and Tracy Thorne and several other people. Dirk Selland, that's another one. So I met some of them personally, and I decided to write a book. And what my theory was that the reason that the ban was stigmatizing was not just simply a superficial idea of discrimination, but there was a whole question of whether people could lead a double life. The practical reality was that in the military, if they were at home, most people still had private lives, and at the time, living a discrete double life was considered to be an acceptable way to live. And that was what people wanted to be left alone back then. In the 1990s, things were starting to change. The politics were starting to change. The identity issue was starting to become more important. It had actually a little bit in the AIDS debate, but it was starting to become more important gradually in the 90s as gay marriage started to become debated more occasionally. But I was more concerned about the idea that if you were excluded from the right to serve in the military, at least serve openly, a lot of other opportunities in life could be denied you. Security clearances, the idea that for lower income people, the military was often their best career option, so really it was an employment issue. And also the idea gay people, especially men, because we have a male-only draft, even though we weren't drafting people anymore, we still have a selective service system which can draft people. And you may have heard that in recent years there's been talk of making women register for selective service. So I thought it was stigmatizing that you're saying that gay men are less worthy of stepping up to taking a common risk when it's necessary. So I thought that was the reason to lift the ban. I wrote this book, and I gave my own narrative, and particularly paid a lot of attention to the issue of the way student deferments had worked, and the fact that the Army had actually stopped asking in the 1960s, and what my experience had been. The book, and I also approached the company, because the company I was working for was working with military officers. I felt that there was a conflict of interest. So that, you hear a lot about that today with the Trump administration. Well, I felt like I had one, and I guess the example I set people forgot about, because we decided I would the company got bought by a company called NWNL, Northwestern National Life in Minneapolis, which when the combined company was called Reliostar. So we decided I would transfer to Reliostar in Minneapolis when the book came out to avoid a conflict of interest. This got very interesting because I went out and lived in Minneapolis in the Churchill Apartments downtown. Had a really good time living there. It was a great city. Went to the Saloon, which was one of my favorite discos of all time, and the gay 90s, of course, on Hennepin. And there was great organizations there. There were great people there. It was a really great place. It's a little smaller in D.C. Minneapolis basically had, and St. Paul basically had everything. And traveled some, went to Europe twice, went to California a few times and so forth. It was a very interesting time in my life. But things started getting dicey. In 1999, my mother, who in 1999 was 85, had what seemed to be a mild heart attack. And I went back and checked up on her a little bit, and then that was in February, and then in May, they decided to do coronary bypass surgery when she had another one. And I was concerned for a little while that unless I moved back, they wouldn't do it. This was a case where, and I'm going to get to something about filial responsibility in just a minute, but this was potentially a very dangerous thing for me. But that blew over, and they did it, and she recovered, and I went back and visited. We hired a caregiver for about 12 weeks. And she recovered fully, and she did very well. She would pass away 11 years later, but I'll get back to that later.